Good morning to everyone, those of you who are joining us live here, or those of you who may be listening to the recording afterwards. Welcome to Governance Live, our series of interviews leading up to Governance Week 2024. Today, we are extremely pleased to have someone who is very near and dear to us at CCGI. Fe Lopez-Collymore has been a director of CCGI for several years and someone who has been really instrumental in the growth of the Institute over these last few years. And I'm so thankful that she's agreed to be one of our guests for our Governance Live series. And I just need to take 1 second, Faye. I did forget to add the spotlight, so let me do that quickly so that the way in which our recording will show up is going to reflect, a nice, easy flow of the conversation with both of us. So I'm very, very happy to have you, Faye. Welcome to Governance Live.
I am very, very glad to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. So
Thank
yes.
you. Thank you, Faye. And as I shared a short while ago, Faye is someone who has been really instrumental in the growth of CCGI. She has been a board director with us for several years, but more so, Faye has a lot of excellent experience as a corporate secretary to the point where we rely on her for advice and guidance with all things corporate secretary related. And also, we are so happy she has been a facilitator for our workshops on the role and function of corporate secretaries. And so today we want to steer the direction of the conversation towards the role of corporate secretary and the importance of how they function in the boardroom itself. So before we get to that, though, Faye, I just want to ask you to share a little bit about yourself with us, just in case there are any persons who don't know you already.
Sure.
And also your interest in governance, because I know you also work as a corporate governance consultant.
Thank you. Thank you for that opportunity, Kamla. I always wonder how much I really have to say about myself, but my journey in corporate governance started many, many years ago, around the same time that the Cadbury corporate governance code came out. It was in the early 90s that I was appointed to company secretary at the Guardian Holdings group of companies, which was still a much smaller group than it is now today. And it has been a very interesting journey for me because I came from a time when corporate governance was probably something that was used in academia. When I studied company law, corporate governance wasn't even mentioned, far less had a chapter or two, which you find nowadays in company law texts. There's a lot of attention paid to corporate governance. So I lived through the introduction of the Cadbury Code and the Enron scandal and financial crisis in 2008 in Wells Fargo. And so it was a very dynamic period, I think, for the evolution of corporate governance. And now I think you can't enter a boardroom without some recognition of the need for good corporate governance in your board and for your organization. So yes, I always had a fondness for company law, and I was attracted to the position of company secretary in the organization. And I think it led me down quite a different path than I might have originally contemplated, but a very exciting and interesting path.
Great. Well, as you say, given your experience since the early 90s and the whole evolution of corporate governance on the whole and its visibility, I think you have also seen an evolution in the role of the corporate secretary as well and how they function in the boardroom. Because
Yeah, absolutely.
so share
When
a little bit.
Yeah, when I first started, um, it wasn't particularly popular for the company lawyer to be the corporate secretary. It was still very much an administrative type function in many organizations. A sort of senior executive assistant would be the one taking on that role. And again, it has been very exciting to see the development and the evolution of the role alongside corporate governance, because the company secretary is such a key player in introducing and maintaining and sustaining corporate governance practices within an organization. That role of the company secretary, one of the benefits of that role is your observer status. So when you sit as company secretary, you're not participating in the meeting in terms of making contributions or presentations or debate. You are a witness to these events. And that gives you a particular inkling into how the board operates, what the board needs, what kind of strategies in corporate governance would be effective for your board or desirable to introduce. So it's a very, very key role, I think, in the development of corporate governance in organizations.
And also in terms of the competence that is required of persons who fulfill that role now. And that's why we are so happy to have you conduct the workshops on the role and function of corporate secretaries, because the expectation in terms of it being more of an administrative role where and of course, I'm not as familiar with all the terminology, but I would share in my mind what it means is generally you function more as a recording secretary, as opposed to today where there's a lot of competence that is required of the corporate secretary beyond the formal documentations.
Yeah, so when I first started doing workshops on the role of the company secretary, again, that would have been in, 2017, that kind of time period. My philosophy, my approach to things is that, yes, I have a lot of experience and knowledge, but I always like to make sure it's backed up by some authority. So I would have done a lot of research as well to also verify for myself that some of the practices that I was adopting and using were in fact best practice. And one of the interesting things I came across was an article that the company secretary needs to be a polymath. Polymath being that you really need to have a whole wide range of capabilities. And one of those capabilities is being very effective with respect to administration. The company secretary keeps the board running. The company secretary makes sure that the minutes are properly written up to record the decisions of the meeting. Everybody else walks out of that room at the end of the meeting, many of them quite thankfully, saying, well, okay, we don't have to worry about this for another month, 2 months, quarter, whatever it is. Company secretary has to write up those minutes, has to identify the action items, follow up with the persons for the action items in due time, ensure that everybody's aware of when the next meeting is going to be, discuss with the chairman the agenda for that meeting. And that is very administrative. But at the same time, it's exceedingly important to keep the engine running, because you could have all kinds of wonderful governance practices. But if the company isn't, if the board isn't meeting, isn't making the decisions they have to make and so on, then the company will flounder. So the admin role is not, it hasn't been sort of pushed aside as not being important. It remains important. Other aspects of the company secretary role would be the need for the company secretary to be strategic. So again, boards of directors are not meeting every day. They're not calling emergency meetings regularly. They meet once a month, once every 2 months, once every 3 months. So the company secretary needs to be strategic, needs to identify, well, okay, what may be required at this next meeting through their reading of the minutes and their knowledge of the organization. Another aspect of the role is that the company secretary generally sits between senior management and the board. So the company secretary, again, that kind of observer role, but they're not just seeing one side, they're seeing both sides, and they're seeing where things that may be happening at an executive level need to be addressed at a board level, or things that are being discussed at a board level need to be communicated back to the executive level. So the company secretary needs to be strategic in being able to recognize those things. Company secretary also needs to have a good understanding of people and how to deal with people, so that the company secretary can effect those communications between those two different bodies who are sometimes not, or may appear to be in opposition.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the board is demanding things, but you don't want your executive to become defensive. You want to be able to communicate that in a way that you can encourage your executive and your board to work together. So it's a whole wide range of skills and competencies that the secretary requires. And I do think being on top of the administrative side is very, very important. You may not have to do it yourself. You may just need to do like I did and hire an excellent admin assistant to help you keep on top of those things. But you're still responsible. It's still your responsibility. I read somewhere the other day that you can delegate authority, but you can't delegate responsibility. So you can delegate things to people to do, but at the end of the day, you are still responsible. So I think those are some of the aspects. But as a director, as a CEO yourself, Kamla, are there aspects of the role that may have sort of stood out for you in your time with CCGI and sitting on our board here?
Yeah, for sure. I will tell you, I have recognized the absolute importance of having a competent corporate secretary. Because if your corporate secretary is not able to fulfill their roles effectively, it can be an absolute nightmare in terms of getting your minutes on time to your directors that they can review, that there can be more focused discussion in the boardroom itself, and no amount of wasted time trying to recall who said what and why. And so from as minute as that to the more strategic too, in terms of ensuring the information to directors, especially if they're board resolutions or round robins, all those kinds of things need to be managed efficiently. And so you need someone who is extremely focused in being able to get that. But as we on that point, I wanted to ask you then, Fe, for persons who may be interested in becoming a corporate secretary, because a lot of persons are. But what has happened is they kind of would enter the corporate secretary's team as an administrative assistant or so, and then they learn by kind of experience as they go along. But if someone is interested in wanting to be a corporate secretary, first of all, what type of characteristics you think is important for that individual to have?
Well, I think one of the things a company secretary needs to be is very detail oriented. Same point that you were saying just now about the need to be on top of things and follow up and so on. You need to be detail oriented. You need to be very organized, because there are lots of moving parts that you need to manage. And I think you really need to develop a strong personality, that two aspects of the personality. One is that you need to be able to be assertive, because you are going to be communicating with CEOs and chairmen and other directors. So you need to be able to have your voice heard. You need to be authoritative. If you are hesitant in how you present your information, then you're not going to get that trust. And directors and senior management want to be able to trust you. And at the same time, you have to be able to be that bridge. You have to be able to understand what is happening in your executive team, how they respond to the board requirements, and communicate with them on that level, and do the same on the other side with the board of directors. Because a lot of the time, people, I was reading, you know, something about personality, you know, personalities and personal behavior traits and things like that, which I think is very important as you evolve as a company secretary and you start operating at that higher level. That becomes more and more important. Your ability to communicate with people, understand their problems, understand where they're coming from, understand the underlying issues. Because a lot of the time, people communicate at a particular level, which is not demonstrating their real concerns or issues.
Hmm.
So, although somebody may be telling you, well, they don't want to do this. So, for example, suppose you're trying to encourage a board to do a board evaluation, and they may have all kinds of reasons why they don't want to do it. You know, as we don't have enough time, they're the more important things to do. But you need to be able then to step back and understand what are the real concerns and develop strategies to address those concerns of the directors or executives or whoever it is that you have to deal with. So I think people skills, I think that's the word I was looking for. People skills, very, very important aspect of the role.
Yeah. Well, I think yes, definitely people skills, but I also love the focus that you have shared, which is having an attention to detail. Not everyone is oriented that way, that you
Mm-hmm.
can be very meticulous in how you handle documentation and keeping track of information and that kind of thing. And so to me it's a very interesting world because I've heard you mention in workshops already, and I've seen other corporate secretaries who are equally passionate as you about the role. You have shared that this is a very exciting profession, that, it allows you to be able to have a very unique worldview. Because, as you say, it's a position that straddles both the board and management team. Uh, so it to me it does require a very unique individual to be able to function successfully, to manage all those minute details, but continue to have that very wide worldview that you could understand context as well. Now, there's another area I wanted to raise, which is starting as early as the Cadbury report, actually, but has been more pronounced over time. The evolution of the role of the corporate secretary has been almost to be an advisor to the chair, advisor to the other directors, and all that. What then do you say to corporate secretaries who need to prepare themselves to be
Mm-hmm.
able to be that conduit for advice or that fountain of knowledge as well sometimes as they may be required? How best can they prepare themselves to function in that larger capacity?
Well, as you were describing how you saw the role, what I was thinking is in terms of that as a company secretary, you have to have a sort of continuous learning mindset. You have to always be hungry to know more. How can I do this better? How can I be more effective? I think the best company secretaries, they have that inbuilt in them. So um, and you always want to be confident in the advice you give. So you're constantly learning, whether it is through taking courses, doing workshops, just keeping on top of current material on corporate governance. You have to be constantly learning. It's a field that is constantly changing. There are new things being introduced on a daily basis, and you have to be open to that. And I think good company secretaries are, and that is recognized and that's trusted, and then they become that resource that the chairman wants to go to. So yeah.
Yes. So, and now can we talk a little bit too about the dual role of the corporate secretary and the general counsel? It,
That's a very that is a hot topic
yes.
and very interesting. And you know, I think it comes down to how you view yourself as an attorney at law. I have always operated in the corporate environment, and I have always seen my role as being an independent one. My role is to, yes, protect the company's interests, and I do that by advising the company as to what is possible, what's not possible, and what are the consequences of particular actions. At the end of the day, the company makes the choice. The executive management makes the choice. The directors make the choice. My job is to lay out the alternatives and the consequences of those alternatives. And from day one, I've always maintained in my head, even though I've never done it, and I probably would be an abject failure if I went into private practice. But it's like, well, I could always walk out of here and hang up my shingle and carry on business as a lawyer. I don't need to be in this corporate environment, which gives you that sense of independence. So I have never felt there was any difficulty in balancing the role of the company secretary and the role of general counsel, because I felt that both require that you act in an independent manner and present, the alternatives and the consequences to the board. The only time at which it may be an issue is where there's an issue between, say, the board and the executive management or the company, where you may need to have separate legal advice for the two entities. Another thing I found as independent, as in-house counsel, is very often you need to rely on external counsel, because external counsel provides certain protections to the company that you as an employee of the company can't provide. And so there are also going to be times when you are going to be giving it to external counsel, in which case the question of independence in the rule becomes less of an issue. So having said that, I have also come across lawyers who operate in a litigation environment, and their ethos is, I protect my client at all costs. I do whatever is needed to protect my client. And in my readings on this question of the duality of the rule, there was a sort of almost even view of persons who viewed it the way I did, that you're an independent role and you can carry out both. And those who felt, no, in my role as in-house counsel, I'm fighting for the company. In my role as company secretary, I'm doing something else. And therefore, the two cannot be married. Having said that, I think the complexity of the role of company secretary has evolved, and depending on the size of the organization, it's a huge job to do both company secretary and being in-house counsel. And if any reason for the split was there, it would certainly be that. And also sometimes as in-house counsel, when you're elevated to senior management and you become part of that senior management team, although you may be still acting in an independent way, you are infected by inside information and things that could make it difficult for you to operate in your role as company secretary. So it becomes a bit of a personal choice where you are at in your career and in the organization. But I don't think it's necessarily something that should not be allowed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because I think you can bring the independence to both roles, but the person must understand that in both roles they have to be acting independently.
Yes, and as you say, because of the growing role, both for the
just the work, yeah,
and corporate secretary, it's important then to also have a good supporting team for both roles that you can.
And it depends on the organization. So, for example, if you're in an organization that has a lot of litigation that has to be managed, you may just need a different mindset in the person who's carrying out that role, a different attitude than, say, the company secretary, who may be more focused on the governance and um and the detail and the administration, as opposed for the person who has a good understanding of litigation and litigation practice to be able to defend the company in those situations.
Okay, as we come to a close to this half-hour governance live, before we come back to governance week itself, I wanted to ask you another question, Faye, and this is because I know that you have done a lot of research in this area, because you're one of those persons who very interested in continuous learning and so, and I've seen it too in the workshops you deliver with us. If someone is looking for good resources in where can I get the latest thinking on corporate secretary issues, I know Australia tend to publish a lot, but are there any particular places that you would direct persons, like here's a good resource that you can go?
Wow. I tend to follow a lot of the institutes, like the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, but also the Governance Institute out of Canada, the Governance Institute out of the UK, Australia, South Africa. I get myself on all these mailing lists, and so that in that way you kind of get the current information. Many of them provide free, especially out of Australia, provide free governance sessions, which are 15-minute, well, not 50, maybe about half an hour like this. And that gives you the insight into the quality of the organization, and they encourage you to sign up to do a paid for course as well, because again, there are lots of those available, and many of them are quite good. You've got lots of good speakers and good material and good exposure that you get. Funnily enough, I signed up for one the other day with the Canadian Governance Professionals Organization, and it was a very small group of us. It was about 14 or 15 of us. And we went into breakout groups. And when we went into the breakout group, 4 of us in our group, we were all from Trinidad, which I thought was just astounding that it's like,
Yeah.
wow, maybe we all think the same way or something. So yeah, it's and the time for some of the Australian ones is 8 and 9 o'clock in the night, but it's sometimes a good time to wind down and spend a little 45 minutes in a session like that. Yes.
Yes, great. So just to underscore what you're saying, there really are lots of resources out there for persons who want to ensure that they're continually connected to how their role is evolving as a corporate secretary. And of course, let's mention we do have a corporate secretaries network here at CCGI. It was launched last year, and the whole mission is to ensure we are able to connect corporate secretaries, because at the moment we don't have qualification criteria for persons to become a corporate secretary. And so lots of times it's kind of based on the practices in the organizations. And when you come up to a particular issue where you are not sure which way to go, there's no one you can turn to for advice. And so the network is meant to help corporate secretaries be able to give that peer support and that kind of thing. It's only open to members of CCGI, though, just to share that as well. Okay, so Faye, I want to thank you so much. I want to encourage persons, if you're not yet registered for Governance Week 2024, make sure to register. You'd be meeting Faye there as well. She'd be one of our moderators for one of the panels coming up. As I haven't yet mentioned, but I will share our opening keynote for Governance Week 2024 is Professor John Elkington, who coined the triple bottom line model, people, planet, and profit. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear him this coming Sunday. Also, I'd like to thank our sponsors of Governance Week 2024. We have 2 gold sponsors, First Citizens Bank and the Massey Group. And we have 5 bronze sponsors, Angostura Limited, Republic Bank, National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, PwC, and GA Rowe and Sons out of Belize. We are so thankful for their sponsorship because it helps us to be able to focus on the important things and not be cutting back in terms of cost and all that. And of course, we have over 50 speakers from around the Caribbean region who will be coming to share their thoughts. Our overall theme is regenerative capitalism, promoting exceptional governance for small states. And it is something we are all interested in doing. How do we ensure our organizations are better run? Because ultimately, it's going to impact the quality of life for all of us in our societies. Thank you, Faye, very much. We appreciate having
Thanks
you.
very much.
Okay, and we'll
Bye-bye.
see everyone for Governance Week next week. Take care now.
Yeah.